When working in Dreamweaver, it's important to stay organized, and being more familiar with workspaces and panels will enable you to do just that. So, to begin with, this tutorial will be discussing workspaces and panels and how we can get more familiar with how they work. So, let's start with workspaces. If you go to the Window menu, you'll notice that there are some default workspaces. If you go down to this little area here where it says Workspace Layout, you'll notice that there are a short list of a number of workspaces. The Designer workspace is the one that comes defaulted with the application. But let's also notice that right up here, you'll see the word Designer, and this will enable you to change to different modes. Notice if I were to change to Classic mode, you'll see that some of the workspace layouts have changed. The inserts are up here at the top, and all of the other panels have been expanded so that you can see them a little bit better. But I'm going to change it back to Designer, as that's the default and it's the one that I'm going to be most interested in working with. You'll also notice that I have a number of panels collapsed in order to facilitate a little bit of a better use of my real estate. And that's one of the things that working with panels enable you to do. Let's check this out. My panels on the side have been collapsed. One of the means of expanding and collapsing panels is to click on this little icon right here. If I were to do just that, you'll notice that now my panels have been expanded. And this is a wonderful way of being much more organized inside of a Dreamweaver environment. Here you'll see that the Files panel has been expanded, and the other ones are collapsed. The means of opening up these other panels is to just click on them once, or if you want to collapse them, click on them twice. If I were to expand one of these panels, you'll notice that down here, if you position your cursor, you'll notice the up and down arrows. This enables you to stretch this open and closed, as you can see here. Or if I wanted to collapse my Files menu, now you'll see my CSS Styles window panel is the only thing that's open. And I can move around some of the elements inside of that panel. You'll also notice that by default, the panels become docked inside of Dreamweaver. If I want to, I can move one of these panels outside and turn them into just a simple floating panel. This, of course, can be double-clicked up at the top and collapsed, or expanded in very much the same way that we did in the previous method. Notice that I pressed on the X and now my CSS window is gone. Well, before we panic, note that any of the panels that are normally visible here on the side can be activated simply by going to the Window menu. And now I can go in here and open up my CSS styles. And there it is, floating on the side as it was before. If I want to return the floating panel back into the docked area that we had over here, all I need to do is to grab it, as you can see, by this little gray icon up at the top. And when I position it in here, you'll notice a number of things. If I were to position it here, and you'll see this long blue line, that would dock the panel as two separate ones. I'm going to remove that because I don't think that's a really good use of the real estate that I have available. But it's nice to know if you happen to have a lot of space available that you can do just that. Also notice if I were to return it over here on the side, you'll see the blue area enabling me to dock my panel here. Again, not exactly what I want to be doing, but it's nice to know that we can do that if we need to. I'm going to return my dock right over here again. And notice this. If I position it inside of this grouping area, you'll notice that the entire area has become blue. And that means if I position my CSS styles there, it will become docked inside of this little grouping area. I can move them around if I want the CSS styles in front of the AP elements. What if I want to remove both of these? Well, notice just selecting one and moving it only moves one of them. But if I have two things in a group that I want to move, I can do the same thing merely by pressing Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC. When you do that, now both of the elements in that group are being moved. I'll return them back to where they were before. And notice this. We were able to put something in a group by nesting it inside of the group, but if you move it just a little bit higher, you'll see that the blue line is right above the group, and that means that that group is separate, and now I have a separate CSS styles group that I have here. Again, if I double click that, I can collapse it, and I can open up some of the other files that are available to me. If I want to, you'll notice that there are things like Business Catalyst, which I'm not really all that interested in working with at the moment. So if I want to, I can just expand it, remove it from its dock, and notice if I double click it, you can sort of see what's going on there. But I'm not really interested in this, so the little X button here enables me to close that and free up some extra space just in case I wanted it. If I needed AP elements, I could work with it, but if I don't, I can just collapse it. And if ever you need to have those back again, all you need to do is go back up to the window menu and access any number of different panels that are available just by clicking on them right here. Some panels even have shortcuts, and you'll notice here I'm on a Mac, so the shortcut says Command F10 for bindings or Command F9 for server behaviors. However, if you're on a PC, remember that anytime you see Command, all you have to do is substitute Control, and that will enable you to access any of the files or anything that you're missing. So remember, that's one surefire way of keeping yourself organized. One last thing I want to mention is that you can also position your mouse here, and you'll see the left and right arrows, and then when you move this particular panel, it will enable you to stretch them out even larger if you want to, or collapse them a little bit smaller. Also notice that when you do collapse to icons, that will only show the icons that I have here. That's how I'm going to be working for the most part, just so that you can have more of a view as to what I'm doing with the rest of the files. And notice when they are collapsed in this fashion, you'll get used to these icons. You can hold your mouse over them and see what their names are. And when you open them up, they just have these separate icons that you can then collapse by clicking on the double arrow that you see right here. They can also be expanded so that they're longer when you're working in this fashion. So I like to work in this way when I don't have a lot of real estate available. However, if you're more comfortable working with your panels open, please feel free to do so. Also notice that when you've collapsed your panels, you can expand them a little bit more so that if you're not familiar with these icons just yet, you can think about expanding the icons so that their names are also visible. It's not as big as what we have here, but it still gives you a little bit more familiarity with the names. So until you're familiar with what these things actually do and what these icons mean, this will be useful to you. However, I'm going to reduce that and collapse it even more. Let's come back in the next video and we'll take a look at the Properties window.